All right, let's get this started. What's going on, digital wildcatters? Welcome to another week of Oil and Gas Startups Podcast. We've got my friend Ahmad here with Clean Energy Services, VC Fuel. We are coming off the week of Fuse, and you actually were one of the panelists on, Chuck Yates wanted to live his dream and have a live podcast with a live audience.
He won't shut up about it.
Yeah, I've heard about it for 2 years, and so all right, Chuck, we'll make it happen at Fuse. And so you were on that panel with him, which was a really great conversation. So first off, appreciate you doing that. Why don't you tell us real quick about what you're working on, what VC Fuel is, and we'll dive into it.
Great. First of all, I should say you guys did an awesome job with Fuse. We need more events like that in Houston. They're either mostly oil and gas events or clean energy events, and you don't have any that fuse.
Yeah.
You guys did a great job of doing that.
You want to know some interesting? So we always run a survey and operate within feedback loops, and some of the interesting feedback that we got. Oil and gas people wanted more oil and gas content, and renewables people wanted more renewables content. And so
that's interesting.
Yeah. I was like, all right, I see the bias there, but overall got overwhelmingly positive feedback. So appreciate you being there and being a part of it.
Oh, my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. So to answer your question, what I do is I run a clean energy platform, and there are multiple elements of that platform. The first is called VC Fuel, and that's a venture fund where we fund companies that are in early to mid stages of development. So either seed capital, $1 to $2 million, or Series A capital, $5 to $10 million. We like to have seats on the board, but we'll look across all of energy transition. So everything from hydrogen to the big three of wind, solar, and storage, to biofuels, and it's a very broad mandate. The second major arm of what our platform is called VC Infrastructure, and that isn't a venture capital firm. That's a company formation firm, and I'd like to call it kind of a corporate platform development company. So what we actually do is when we see ideas that we like, but we can't find them in the venture world, we then go found a company, and we own it ourselves, and we grow it from scratch. And
so kind of a venture studio type model there,
yeah,
where you see an opportunity in the market, and then you go stand up something to serve that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I think the difference is, in this case, we try to start not as a seed company, but capitalize it pretty well from the beginning, so that you have a 3 to 4 year runway from inception, so that you can really focus on building the company and not on fundraising, which is what I find a lot of the venture-backed companies do. So
yeah.
So you guys have this concept, and then do you usually have like a management team in mind, or at least like a CEO in mind, or is it you guys are kind of the operators until you bring in that management? Like how does that work?
Great question. So we start generally as at the leadership level, CEO, chairman, but then quickly thereafter we bring on professional managers, and a lot of times we've had those people in mind. Ideally, you'd be able to bring a whole integrated team, but usually bring subject matter experts, functional experts from different areas. And the first example of that is a company that we founded called Clean Energy Services, and it's to put it in oilfield terms, it's literally just an OFS company for clean energy. So instead of servicing oil and gas, completion services, for example, we service wind, solar, and storage, which are really the big three elements of renewable energy.
It's a pretty easy analogy to understand.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like, all right, how do I talk to these oil and gas guys? Schlumberger oilfield services for renewables. No.
And frankly, that was one of the easiest things to explain. To explain to investors in terms of companies that we've been involved in, because a lot of our investors are from Houston. They're from oil and gas, so they get the energy services analogy. And the reason we founded that company is we had a lot of entrepreneurs coming to us inbound with that strategy, but there wasn't that much differentiated about them. They were smart guys and women, and they had really interesting kind of takes on building an energy services firm. But a lot of times they didn't know anything about clean energy. They came from oil and gas. So we wanted to kind of, to use your term, fuse the two, bring some great people and services from the oil and gas world and from the clean energy world, and found a company around that. So that's what we ended up doing. We started fundraising for that company in January of this year of 2022, and we thought this year would be really just a company building and company formation year where we build our skill sets, make sure the team is gelling well together, and the customers would come in 2023. But because, and we can talk about this later, the phenomenon of the mismatch between supply and demand in terms of service providers and actual assets in clean energy has just got faster. So
Yeah.
we got GE as a major customer. We've got the number one IPP as a major customer. So we're off and running. And I guess
Yeah.
I give this one more airtime because
Yeah.
I'm pretty passionate about what we're doing there right
Well,
now.
let's dive into that and talk more about it. For someone like me, I grew up in oilfield services, so understand that analogy
Yeah.
perfect. Let's talk about the services that are involved in renewables because I've seen videos of you know cleaning service or solar panels. I've seen both manual processes, automated processes for those. I've seen servicing gearboxes on wind turbines, and so what do you guys actually do at Clean Energy Services on the actual servicing? What services are offered?
Yeah, so the three verticals are wind, solar, storage. We decided to start with wind because it just has the higher margins and the higher barriers to entry. And you learn that same lesson from energy services. You want to get into the areas where you can differentiate yourself.
Hmm.
And on that, we actually do full wrap services. So we have cranes, which are not cheap,
Yeah.
and we have up tower technicians. So people, to your point, who just switch out or fix gearboxes, do oil changes, and for customers like GE, we do everything, full service menu, what they need and what they require to both have preventive and corrective maintenance.
Hmm.
On storage, which I think is the kind of the most exciting area of the entire renewable industry because it's growing so
It
fast.
changes
and
the
so
game for
big.
everything else too.
And
Yeah,
it's
absolutely,
critical,
game changer.
right?
It's
So,
the
I
only
mean,
yeah.
yeah.
It's the only one that that can make renewables, as you guys know, baseload
Yeah.
Yeah.
power. So
Yeah.
that's just a rocket ship. There's so many new companies in the space. A lot of them Texas based, like Broadreach and
Hmm.
Jupiter. There are a lot of integrators who put all the pieces together. But what makes it even more complicated is there are a lot of different software providers that integrate all these storage assets.
Hmm.
And even more complicated is there are 20 plus battery providers, none of whom work together. So that's a dream for a services firm because someone has to help service all these different layers of complexity within the storage space.
Yeah.
And as you might know, half of the or more of the battery companies are Chinese, and a
Yeah.
lot of the manuals that literally the manuals that our field guys get, or that the integrators or other people get from the Chinese battery companies are in Mandarin. So they
Oh, wow,
they
they're
use
not
Google
even
Translate. No
translated.
joke. It's like they're in
Wow.
Mandarin. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and
So
Google Translate's not very good when it
uh,
comes to technical technical translation.
yeah. So any
But
Mandarin speakers out there who like energy services, please let us know.
We need you.
Exactly.
I've actually I have a friend that I placed at a previous startup in. He's Chinese, so he's a petroleum engineer. You guys should talk to him.
Thanks. I
Yeah,
appreciate
yeah.
it.
I'll connect you guys after this.
It's my one person I know that speaks Mandarin.
Yeah, well, and the nexus of Mandarin and petroleum
That's
engineer
pretty
and
neat, yeah.
energy. So, no, that's super interesting. I mean, like in OFS, what was this is kind of opening my eyes a little bit, especially on the battery storage side, because in OFS, what was really unique about it was that you had so many disciplines, right? And I mean, from water transfer, water hauling, nippling up services, BOPs. I mean, there were just all these little subsectors. And so when, you kind of said it's like a dream for a service company because there's all these different services. You can be an expert in one of them and build a company around it. And I was always thinking about renewables because to your point, you had a lot of companies come pitch the idea, but seems a little bit commoditized, low barrier to entry. Now I know there's a lot of CapEx, especially like with cranes and stuff
Yeah,
like that. But I was always like, it just seems a little bit commoditized servicing gearboxes and cleaning
Yeah.
solar panels. But on the battery side, I didn't know that there's all these different layers
Yeah.
to energy storage, and now
Yeah.
you guys can go find a niche in there or be a full service platform. So that's actually something I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, it's eye opening when you go out in the field and you see it, and the thing that's even more interesting is this has never been done before in the U.S. to this level of complexity. So, to your point, generally services have low barriers to entry, but when you have no one who's ever done it before and you're a first mover, you can build some moats around it.
Hmm.
And kind of back to wind and solar, our philosophy across all three verticals is it's very simple: best people, best technology. The way you build a moat, in my belief, and we'll see if we can prove this out over time, is by building and integrating technology into your solutions. And we're already starting to do that in the storage vertical.
Hmm.
And the second thing, that the number one question I get from CEOs in the renewable space is, what's your talent pipeline? What are you doing? How are you going to secure teams that don't leave? Because right now they're getting poached left and right because the industry is so competitive and it's short people.
Yeah. I mean, in
So
OFS, you'd leave for $1 more an hour. That was just kind of.
exactly,
I was one of those guys, so I know how it
exactly,
goes. Yeah.
exactly. So what we're doing on that, which I thought was a no-brainer, but has become hopefully a differentiator for us, is we're building our own talent pipeline and sponsoring job training, retraining programs. We have a partnership with Houston Community College. We have multiple veteran program
I love this.
partnerships,
Yeah.
and we're hoping to have kind of over 100 people kind of graduate from our training programs next year, and
Yeah.
probably double that the next year.
Yeah, you know what was always really interesting about Halliburton, for instance? Halliburton's schooling and education was a mainstay for the company, and so my father-in-law, he worked at Halliburton for 40 years, and he graduated school, went through Halliburton. I don't know if it was mud school, drilling school,
Yeah,
whatever it
yeah,
is, but they were always so good about building their pipeline and upskilling and education. And I have other things to say about them as an actual service company.
yeah,
I think that there's better services out there, but their tentacles run deep in people that were educated by Halliburton, and so looking at this like vertically integrated
Hmm.
pipeline, I mean, one, I love that because I love that y'all have the opportunity to open up opportunities for other people and upskill people. So
It's a
that's
major
super cool.
differentiator
Yeah,
because it's something that's still so rare,
yeah,
particularly
it
in
is.
the new market that you guys are in.
Yeah.
So I want to know about your story because I know Colin told me a little bit, Chuck told me a little bit. I've probably forgotten more than I remember. But really quickly before we get there, for on the clean energy services side, I think what helps me conceptualize things is like, what does clean energy services want to be when it grows up? Does it want to be that Halliburton on the clean energy side of the Schlumberger? Do you guys want to go public? Do you want to just keep this private and run it? Like, what are y'all's ambitions?
Our goal, and this is a very I like to set lofty goals, is to be the Halliburton or Schlumberger or Baker Hughes of clean energy.
Mhm.
And that's why I asked, because I'd heard a little bit of your background and I figured that was going to be the
Yeah,
sense, right?
and
So just
Schlumberger is
wanna-
probably the closest analogy, just because
Yeah.
they have such a great tech focus, and we're trying
Yeah.
to build that in from the beginning.
Yeah.
But that's our North Star.
I love
Yeah.
it. I love it.
So,
Yeah, well, I always, I was sitting down with a friend the other day that wants to start a drilling mud company, and he's just like, "There's got to be a way to create a better drilling mud company that's built, tech enabled from the beginning." And I was like, "Yes, across all service companies." And so, if you build from scratch and really think about it from a tech perspective, there's a huge opportunity there. But yeah, let's get into your backstory a
Sure.
little bit.
Are you from
Before-
Houston?
Before, yeah,
No?
yeah, it's a kind of a complicated story, but I'll start
wherever you
from the
want to.
beginning.
Yeah.
So I was born in Kuwait.
Okay.
My mom's from Ohio and my dad's from Jordan.
Okay.
They met in Germany as exchange students, and they're
This story's all over the place
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
well, it gets even better. So their love affair was in German because neither one spoke the other one's language. So it was kind of, can you imagine meeting someone and
Yeah.
Yeah.
20% proficiency in the language?
Such a
That's it.
violent language.
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
Like-
Exactly. It's not romantic at all.
Yeah.
So then when they got married, they came back to Ohio, got their MBAs from Miami, Ohio, and then moved to Kuwait, and that's how I ended up being born there. And that the reason Kuwait's important, it kind of in my background and influencing my future, both educational kind of focus and career focus, is I lived in a company in a country that at that time was 99% reliant on oil, right? So I have energy in my veins. I mean, that's all I saw growing up. The oil fields were not far from where we lived.
Yeah.
Everyone worked in the industry. The entire country was reliant on it, or else it wouldn't exist, frankly, as a country. And
Yeah,
so,
I mean, it's just like growing up in the Permian Basin. It's
exactly,
the same thing.
exactly.
Not to interrupt your story, but I just heard an interesting fact about Kuwait last week. I didn't realize how small it was. Geographically, like you can drive across it in like 2.5 or 3 hours. So I always imagine Kuwait just being a lot bigger place than it was, but it's probably about the size of the Permian Basin.
I think it's probably smaller.
Yeah,
it is smaller actually. To kind of jump from that, Qatar, where the World Cup is being hosted in a month, is about a quarter the size of Kuwait. So these countries, and Qatar produces 20% of the world's LNG.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's so nuts. Just the density
of energy production there.
And it goes to like 100,000 citizens. These aren't that many Qataris, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you just do the math on that.
Yeah.
It's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
So,
that's wild.
But anyway, so I was born there, and then at the age of 10, we moved actually to Ohio, to Cleveland, which is where I went to middle school and high school, and resulted in me being a huge Cleveland sports fan, which is a very sad place to be generally. And
we were just talking about how small Cleveland is to have all these sports teams last week.
This is weird how all this is coming together, because we just did an event up in Columbus about a month ago. Yeah. And Columbus, great city. And I've been to Cleveland too. And, I did a lot of oil field work around southeastern Ohio, but I didn't realize how small the populations were in Cleveland and Cincinnati. And I'm like, not a lot of people there. And I was like, how do they even support this many sports teams? And, super passionate fan base though. And so, it's
Cleveland's like the size of College Station, which is nuts.
Yeah. Like it's,
and it shouldn't, if you base it on any metric, have 3 major teams.
Yeah.
But because of that, for example, the Cavs have, I think, like the 4th or 5th largest following in the country, because all the other small cities around it, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, don't have NBA teams. So they actually cover Ohio and
they can actually draw.
Yeah, they draw
markets. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Sorry. So I moved to, let's see.
That's kind of what we do on this show. We just go on tangents. So you
moved to Ohio, went middle school and high school there, and then I went to undergrad college at Harvard, and I actually started focusing on energy economics there. And then I was a Rhodes Scholar, and I went to Oxford, and I did my master's in U.S.-Saudi relations and the economics of oil. So my entire life, I've been pretty obsessed with the energy industry. And when I left grad school, so I finished Oxford in 1998. Most of my friends were going to tech, and I said, I want to do oil and gas, and they just kind of looked at me, especially because I went to school in the Northeast where oil and gas is a big deal. They're like, really? That's kind of contrarian and weird, considering the whole country's going to tech. So
.com.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was a great area to do it. So I've been in it ever since. I would say prior to starting VC Fuel and the platform companies of VC infrastructure like CES, my career would probably be split into two halves. The first was I was an entrepreneur, so I co-founded an energy software company that did transaction and risk management for pipeline companies and in utilities. We grew that and ended up selling it at a good result for our investors. I then founded a second company. This was kind of another geographic leap. I had some contacts in Brazil, and that was when renewable fuels. So this is kind of my first kind of renewable experience. Were getting pretty interesting. So we started a Brazilian ethanol company. We actually built an ethanol mill in a very remote province of Brazil called Mato Grosso do Sul, where I had to live for a year. They didn't have any even. It was all indigenous people, so you didn't really have any European Brazilians there. So it was really interesting.
Yeah,
but also lonely at times. And so we built that mill, and our goal at that point was, hey, we'd love to consolidate part of the industry and have 7, 8, 9 mills, but then Bush passed which were very helpful. These ethanol mandates that caused a lot of capital to go to Brazil. And it just became too competitive cost of capital wise. So we just took the mill and sold it.
Yeah. That's really interesting. You spent a year there, and it sounds like it's really remote with indigenous people. And
That's still a crazy concept to me.
I've told
Indigenous
Jake,
people in general.
yeah, I worked for a company and I was supposed to go I was supposed to go run some expandable casing on this rig, and he told me where it's at. It's on the border of Brazil and Colombia, and it was like a 2-day boat ride down the Amazon to get to this rig. And I don't speak Portuguese, and then you're sending me out. And one, I never even worked an international job, so I'm not used to converting to metrics, and I'm running tools down hole. Like, it's kind of a big deal.
Imagine calling on like this little like wooden raft, and like arrows are getting shot at him. And
yeah, I'm on this little boat going to run some tools. So I can imagine that experience was. I'm sure you have some good stories from that, but yeah, so that's super interesting. So you build this mill, all this capital comes in. Comes too competitive, you guys just sell it, flip it, and
what'd y'all do after that? What'd you do after that?
Yeah, so that was kind of the first phase. I said the second phase of my career is I went into private equity, and most as context, most private equity people come up through investment banking, so they work for whether it's Goldman Sachs.
What was the motivation there to go from being an entrepreneur to doing your own thing to like what drew you to private equity?
I thought it would be interesting to buy and improve companies, and it generally where I was going to join. So I joined BlackRock, which was the biggest asset manager in the world.
Yeah, small shop, yeah.
And then Morgan Stanley. Just the scale of what I was going to be able to do would be much bigger.
Yeah,
and I just wanted to test that. And frankly, I even though I spent a number of years in private equity, I enjoy the smaller scale more, actually, the company building scale. But that was to test my ability and interest in doing large deals. And so I
all energy deals across both those.
So I was at BlackRock I was head of private energy investing, and at Morgan Stanley Infrastructure I was also head of private energy investing. And so those were my two private equity jobs. But really, it was a really interesting time to be there, because when I joined BlackRock, that's when shale started taking off.
Yeah.
My public company counterpart, the head of public company investing at BlackRock, was one of my mentors, Dan Rice, who I think, he had, I think something like 10 out of 11 years, he had the best investment track record. And
I mean, Dan Rice, the Rice brothers' father, the OG.
Yes.
The Dan Rice.
Yes, the Dan Rice. And obviously his kids are great, and they've made him very proud. But he, BlackRock, he was the man. I mean, if you wanted to talk to anyone in energy at BlackRock, literally the week I joined, he was in the Boston office. I was in New York. I went to see him. I was like, teach me whatever you can. And he told me, well, there's this little thing about to develop called the Marcellus that most people aren't talking about. And so we kind of went from there, right? And then I ended up making private investments while I was at BlackRock, actually in the Appalachian Basin, as well as in other areas of the country.
Awesome.
And I also did one renewable investment in cellulosic ethanol, which did okay. It's still kind of a nascent field.
Yeah. So really interesting, because one, you're a builder, you're an entrepreneur. You've built companies. You go in the private equity world, get this experience doing these large projects. You've been in renewables and oil and gas, and it doesn't really sound like those were bifurcated like you were doing all of them kind of at one time, right? Yeah. And so which is just awesome, because it's kind of a just pro energy mindset. Like, you don't care what the energy source is, whether it's ethanol, whether it's oil and gas, you were just doing things right. So that's actually really unique and interesting,
particularly at that point in time.
Yeah,
like, because it's still not a very common
when you're at BlackRock. You said you got there and shale starts taking off. What did you think about the opportunity for renewables, from that time period of 2010 to, I'll call it 2016, when there's just so much capital going towards shale? I mean, did you see a lot of opportunity to be investing in renewables, or was it kind of just like, hey, capital's flowing to oil and gas? That was the main focus.
We still, so I'm not, by no means am I prescient, but I thought, and I think this now on the opposite side, just because all the money's flowing to one source of energy, one thing we learned in this industry is we're continually surprised by things that happen in terms of resource availability or geopolitics or things like that.
Yeah,
we should still also build in the renewables side. And one of the things I'm proudest of at BlackRock is I was charged with recruiting a renewable power team to do wind solar acquisitions and developments into BlackRock. And it was a guy named Jim Barry from Ireland who had run a big renewable company, and he came. We raised the first fund around him. It was $300 million. Now I think they have like 20 billion under management. So they've done.
Yeah.
So just to give, but to your point, back then it was hard to even raise $300 million for wind and solar,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now it's like
Yeah.
now it's really easy. Whereas
Yeah.
in shale, it was much easier to raise much bigger fund sizes.
Yeah.
So I've always been an all of the above person. I mean,
Yeah.
I my first experience was oil. The reason I studied a lot about oil in undergrad and grad school is it still is the dominant kind of commodity in the world, right? It's still the dominant source of energy along with nat gas.
Yeah.
And to me, it was intriguing to try to understand, which until today is hard to figure out, U.S.-Saudi dynamics and how politics interplays into how we deal with OPEC.
Mhm.
But I also thought that there are these renewable energy sources that are growing pretty fast in certain areas of the world, and especially in the U.S. Sorry, in Europe, led by Germany. I mean, Germany basically enabled the solar industry for the rest of the world because they brought the cost of solar down by investing so much in it, along with the Chinese. And so I just thought it was it's a global solution to our energy problems.
Yeah.
Like needs every source of energy that's viable, right? There's no other way to do it.
It's an all of the above approach, right?
Yeah.
Like keeping in mind, second order effects with atmospheric gas concentration and things like this, but understanding that energy demand continues to increase and we need every available energy source, and it also needs to be diverse. I mean, you talk about geopolitics, the physics of energy are already hard enough,
Yeah.
right? And then you layer over geopolitics on top of that. And you brought up Germany. I mean, I think what we've seen in this year has really opened up people's eyes that, hey, we need to have diverse energy systems. That way we're not relying on any one country or foreign entity. And so I think that, all the bad that's happened over the last 2 years, hopefully silver lining is a little bit more sound energy policy and understanding that, hey, we all need to work together to power the world. And that was the whole thesis with Fuse. So
Yeah.
Nice little pitch there.
Cut that for Fuse 2023.
Exactly. What's it, 80?
Yeah, if you haven't bought your ticket yet, grab one on the website. So yeah, but that's when we did Fuse, it's funny because when you're online, like on places like Twitter, it's so segregated. You have oil and gas Twitter, renewable Twitter, you have nuclear Twitter, and the renewable folks, they hate nuclear and oil and gas. But here in our office, here in Houston, like we see people that are on both sides all the time.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
actually the people that are doing shit that are, open to, hey, oil and gas working with renewables
Yeah.
and hydrogen and
I
carbon
think as
capture.
with everything, same with politics, I think the middle is so much larger than it is the majority. It's just that you got squeaky wheels on both sides, and those are the ones that get the grease, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, moving forward, one, I want to ask about clean energy services and, this whole time, you're funding oil and gas deals, you're funding renewable deals. Did it seem like this, like, always seems like, there's just ideas sitting there in front of,
Yeah.
it's like, why has no
Yeah.
one done
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
Did you have that kind of epiphany with clean energy services? Of just
Yeah,
like,
and with VC Fuel, I mean, to me, there was such a future demand for investment in renewables, right? So one thing that happened, and a lot of people ask, well, you were doing well in oil and gas investing, and you were doing some renewable investing at the same time at BlackRock or Morgan Stanley. Why did you decide to do venture and company building in renewables? And really, what happened is when we started talking to our biggest investors about future funds we would raise, and the eye-opening moment to me was regarding an asset that I had led the purchase of, and had turned around, and we made over $1 billion in profit for our investors, but it was an oil and gas asset, and our investor base was global. the reaction I got, in 2015, it would have been high fives, but this was a couple years later, and it was very mixed. It was, thanks for making us money, but we want you to do more renewables. And so I started thinking, wow, this is
I just
is
made
where
you
the
$1
world's
billion.
going.
Can I get a little bit more of a thanks here?
This is the reaction. This is where the world is going. And it was a very simple thing for me. And I didn't see as many people investing in renewables. So I said, I want to stay within energy, but I think there's a big opportunity here where there's a lot of investor demand. And so a lot of ability to raise money to do things like you said that are obvious within these. Now, I almost don't want to say this because I don't want everyone who's listening to this to go start companies in these areas. But if you name any big renewables area, they don't have a defined services sector or even a services leader. So hydrogen, there are no electrolyzer services companies of any size. Offshore wind, there are none of every size.
That's crazy.
The renewables industry focuses on assets. That's it, and grow them as fast as you can because of all these government incentives. And they don't think about the services, the technology, and the things that are going to eventually enable these assets to function.
Yeah,
right?
I see some movement on the software side, especially when it comes to distribution and load balancing and connecting all these assets. But the boring businesses, the service businesses. I mean, look, I have friends that own some OFS companies that are filthy rich. There's opportunity there.
Exactly.
And so, that's really wild to me that, there's not just some companies that have taken over that space. And so that's what I kind of figured, that you had that epiphany. It's like, hey, this idea is right out here. And, it takes some CapEx. It takes building up a pipeline.
Yeah.
That's one thing OFS is dealing with right now is, even if we wanted to go out, take material and any capital constraints away, if you wanted to go drill 20 wells right now, there's labor shortages in OFS to have the personnel to run as many drilling rigs and frac spreads as you need.
Yeah.
And so it's always over there, it's a material and a personnel thing. You don't have to deal with the material supply chain aspect as much over in renewables. It'd be more of a personnel thing. But look, there's a lot of hardworking people out there that want good paying jobs. And so that just takes time to build up that base.
Let me ask you this. Why don't more people do this whole like venture studio model? Like we have a friend who does that, and we thought it was a pretty like novel concept. Is it?
I actually have two friends that
do
it.
Is it the capital constraints? Is it just not, I don't know, people just don't see the ability just to start businesses from scratch? Like, I'm just kind of curious about your experience.
One theme that I see between Ahmad and Mark and JT is that they're all entrepreneurs that
they're all
built
builders.
companies previously, and then they went.
Maybe there's just not enough entrepreneurs who are now in the kind of the investing game.
I think that was one of the things I was going to say. And what we found as well, even not just the person starting the company, whether it's me or someone else, it's the management team. It's hard to find someone from a corporate background who, at a certain point of their career, can make the jump into a very entrepreneurial environment. It's just hard because they're used to systems and processes and not working past certain hours and things like that. And so to us, we always look for people who, even if you fail, that's great, but at least try
like failed entrepreneurs or whether fail or success, right? And,
exactly. And so I think that's the number one impediment. But the other big impediment is our investment industry is just organized into structures that evolved over time that people don't want to deviate from. So you have private equity funds, you have infrastructure funds, and you have venture funds. And those are the three major categories of funds now that are being raised in the financial community. So it's much easier. The easy button is to do venture capital, invest in other people, and try to make a return that way. And it's probably easier to raise money for that than to say, hey, I'm going to start a platform from scratch, and we don't know whether it's going to work or not, but we really believe in this idea, and we want you to invest in into multiple of these.
Yeah.
Right. That takes a little bit more of a leap of faith, but I also think the upside is going to be much higher. Like the VC industry is so well defined now that there's just a playbook on how to do it.
It's very commoditized too. I mean, there's capital everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So we got a few minutes here before we wrap up the podcast. And so a couple things. One, remind me, there's a podcast that I need to go dig up from Noah Kagan that you should listen to, because his guest on there has bought and acquired 29 tech companies, and he talks about he can run 3 to 5 at a time. And he talks about how he goes and finds CEOs in his network to run these companies. Cause that was going to lead up to a question of, you're going to be a busy guy if you're CEO of all these ideas. Yeah. So how do you think about, when you start scaling these companies and, taking yourself out and finding new management teams and CEOs? I mean, you might have not even got to that point yet. I don't know if you burned any brain cells on that yet, but how do you think about that?
Well, I mean, first of all, you're right. It's an incredible amount of work, but it's so gratifying when it's your own business that you're building, and frankly, like the job creation aspect to me is really, really exciting to see these people go through our training programs and to make a lot more than they used to. Now they're more technically proficient. But to answer your question, in all of the platform companies, when I start them, I generally have a clear number 2 person who might not be quite ready to take over, but has the talent, the skill, and we have that person in CES.
Yeah,
and we have that person in another company we're starting, and so there's no way I'm going to be CEO of 5 companies at once, right? I may be chairman of 5 companies.
Yeah.
So it's not doing service to investors, and it's also untenable. So you need to have that talent that can rise within.
Yeah.
And I'm a really strong believer in having someone who can be kind of like you bring in as a co-founder with the upside that, hey, look, if this goes well, you become CEO, right?
Yeah.
And if not, you go hire a CEO.
I love it. So if someone's listening to this and they're interested in a couple of things, potentially bringing an idea to you or going through a training program at Clean Energy Services and working with you guys, how can they find y'all? What's the website? Can they find you on LinkedIn?
So vcfuel.com is one of them. It's very easy. VC, the letters, and then fuel. And by the way, everyone, I misnamed the company because I wanted a short domain name, and everyone thinks it stands for venture capital fuel. The VC part, it actually stands for, if you go to the website, for very clean fuel.
Oh.
no one gets that. Yeah. I can't retract.
I thought it was venture capital fuel.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys did too.
Yeah.
So very clean fuel, vcfuel.com, and CES is cesrenewables.com.
Awesome. All right. So if you're listening, we'll drop links into the show notes. You can go check it out there. Reach out to Ahmad. Just amazing guy with a just huge depth of knowledge. So we appreciate you, taking the time to come do this, participating at Fuse, and hopefully, we get to do this some other time in the future. Appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. You guys have been great. Fun. Thank you.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. If you like this show, guys and girls, if you like this show, please send it to a friend. Leave us a 5-star review, and we will catch you next episode.